And we always made more than that. That was a minimum, so we didn't worry about it. But then, as the last of '87, when business had slacked off, and all of a sudden we were making Gaffney and Chesterfield, South Carolina, instead of being in Chicago, because we didn't have a program, we didn't have anything hot, anybody to wrestle. It continued that way the first part of '88, and that's when we talked Dusty into bringing in the Fantastics, Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers, because we said, business is going to be down, at least we need to have some great matches and have some fun. And these guys, with the exception of the Rock and Roll Express, are the best in-ring babyface tag team in the business. Please bring them in. I gave Dusty some ideas for what we could do. We put them over their first night in, gave them credibility as much as we could, and the matches were off the charts. They were really, technically, they were better than our matches with the Rock and Roll. Gate-wise, different story. Now we needed to do something about our money because we were getting paid on the houses. See, we had a minimum guarantee, but it was a balloon payment. At the end of the year, if you hadn't made your guarantee, they'd make it up to you all in one fell swoop. Did you want to jump in on something?
Well, you mentioned a guarantee. Somebody said that they started handing out contracts to some of the top guys, and they said that was another reason they might have went into the hole.
Well, no. That's because the people that said that didn't have the contracts, because I'm about to tell you how it really worked.
So it wasn't the contract that killed them.
It was the guys jealous they didn't get the contracts. Here's what happened. The contracts that we had been signed to in 1986, that all the Crockett talent were signed to, were minimum guarantees. You're going to make 50 grand a year minimum, 100 grand a year, whatever the case was. But you weren't paid in regular increments. You were paid on the houses, and at the end of the year, if you had not made your minimum, they would make it up to you in a balloon payment. We had been on 100 grand a year apiece since 1986 when they first started signing contracts to make sure nobody went to work for Vince. We always made well over that, so there was no reason to even worry about a balloon payment at the end. But then, as business had gone down, 87, 88, first we got the Fantastics in, now we've got some leverage. We're going out, we're tearing the house down every night, we've got a great team to work with. Now we got to renegotiate our deal. Because, to be quite honest, sometimes we were making $800, $900 a week, going to these spot shows that weren't drawing very well, not being figured in. That wasn't going to fly for too much longer. So it was probably about March or April that we went in to talk to Jimmy Crockett and said, hey, it's not our fault. We've been with you. We've drawn money. We don't have anybody to work with. Now we've got the Fantastics, but we need something. Give us something. That's when he was still under the impression that all this television and pay-per-view money was going to come in. And he told us at that time, well, I was actually going to renegotiate with you guys because I want to get everybody tied up because we're going to have this Sunday main event on TBS where we're going to pay like a main event house show. Got pay-per-view money coming in, television ad revenue money coming in. You guys are going to do really well. You're figured in. Okay, well, so what are we going to do? I don't have down what we had you figured at. Well, we'll come back when you do have it, right? So we come back the next week, have another meeting, me and Bob Eaton and Stan Lane. And nobody would throw out a figure first. And finally, just to be a smart ass, I said, well, geez, Jimmy, it sounds to me like we're going to make $250,000 a piece next year. We had you down at 200. This face, right? Okay, I said, well, hell, let's just split the difference and say 225. And he said, yes. I was being a smart ass, right? Just to get something going. All of a sudden, he has offered us $225,000 a year guaranteed a piece. Besides for, I believe, the Road Warriors, I don't know what Flair and Dusty were doing, but that was chump change for them at that point in time anyway. We were the first ones to renegotiate, even before Tully and Arn. So basically, we, without delay, got them to draw this paperwork up, and we went in and signed our contracts that said we were going to make, for that calendar year, that next...
We're going to say what happened, how will you remember it, how should the fans remember Crockett Promotions, and then you can tell us. Don't go way in depth. Kind of talk about rock and roll.
The rock and roll.
History of the Rock and Roll Express.
Let me do the rock and roll a little bit, and then we'll do the wrap up.
But that just started in Mid-South, right? But they started in Memphis, but then where I guess you saw them for the first time.
Yeah.
But
burp. We get all the burping out. The Rock and Roll Express as a team started in Memphis, and they were actually the second banana team to the Fabulous ones, Stan Lane and Steve Kern, because the Fabs in Memphis, in that territory, were so over and drawn so big The business, they were running 2 towns a night, and they needed another team. And this was right as MTV had come on the air, 1982. Lawler, Jimmy Hart, they both take credit for it. Whichever one was the case, they put Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson together, put the bandanas on them, the Rock and Roll Express, and they were the B team tag team. But when Watts hit, business was down in Mid-South, and Watts came to Memphis to try to look for some new talent. At the same time, this was the end of '83, Memphis, after having a great summer where they drew 8,000 people minimum for 5 months in a row every Monday night in Mid-South Coliseum, Lawler was booking, and there were 45 guys in the territory, and Jerry Jarrett wanted to pare down the cards. So the thought was that Watts can get some new talent from Jerry Jarrett, and Jarrett can get a few new talents from Bill Watts and get rid of some people he wasn't using. The people they weren't using in Memphis that Watts was interested in were Bobby Eaton, Dennis Condrey, Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson, Terry Taylor, myself, and Bill Dundee as a booker, which is pretty good talent. Of course, I wasn't then, but I got to be. So that's the only time I've ever known anybody get the better of Jerry Jarrett in a business deal, because Watts proceeded to have a record year for business in 1984, and the guys that Jerry Jarrett got were Jim Neidhart, Rick Rude before he was Rick Rude, and a couple of other people that didn't do very good at all. But the Rock and Roll Express and Bob Eaton and Dennis Condrey weren't a tag team, and I wasn't managing them. But Watts saw that. He said, these guys would be good together. So the Rock and Roll in Midnight got started in Louisiana, and we set a number of gate records there with them because it was perfect. Yin and yang, the protagonist and the antagonist, the mirror image teams. Every one of them could work their ass off. They could have great matches that the people in Mid-South especially weren't used to seeing, because they were used to big ex-football players and big heels and big guys. And along came the Rock and Roll Express and just lit the place up, and the women loved them. And the crowds were 60%, 70% female. And I mean, literally, just the Rock and Roll Express's cast-offs for the night in Houston would have made anybody else great sex life for a year. It was amazing. They were rock stars. And so when the Rock and Roll in Midnight got on the map in Louisiana and that territory, naturally, Dusty wanted to do the same thing in the Carolinas. When we first started in working for Crockett, Dusty kept us apart. And he told everybody, he had a meeting. Midnight Express are going to be my new top heel team. They ain't going to lose nobody, nowhere. You ain't going to beat them. We even won battle royals. Bobby and Dennis, the heels, would win a battle royal and split the money. It was that good of a push. And at the same time, he blew the Rock and Roll Express over in one night, beating the Russians for the World Tag Team title. So finally, in January 1986, it was time. It'd been 6 months. It's time to pull the trigger and get to Rock and Roll in Midnight together. And we started doing the first couple of things on television, and I'll never forget that the first, February 2nd, 1986, I believe it was, you can check my book, the first match between the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express in Charlotte. There was a big show in Toronto, and Crockett was sending talent to Toronto for the Tunnies at that time. So Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, and the Road Warriors were in Toronto at the same time as we were in Charlotte on top in the main event without all these big stars. The first sellout of the Charlotte Coliseum, legitimate sellout since 1978, Ric Flair and Blackjack Mulligan. $102,000, 12,000 people. And as soon as we saw that, we're like, oh my God, this is going to be big, obviously. And then, of course, there was a story that Dusty came back and said, nobody sells out Charlotte without Dusty Rhodes on the card. And so the next time, like 3 or 4 weeks later, Dusty was on the card, so was Flair, so was the Road Warriors, but we were back with the Rock and Roll, sold out again. Another 102,000, another 12,000 people. Then the next show was like a couple of weeks later on a Sunday afternoon. It was a Rock and Roll Midnight, I think 2 out of 3 falls and a full card. Did like another 80 grand. And then we came back like another 5 weeks later with the Rock and Roll and Midnight, with me hung in the cage and Flair against Dusty, and not only sold out the Coliseum in Charlotte, another $102,000, another 12,000 people, but they actually closed-circuited the thing down the street to the Park Center and down to Spartanburg. So that regular house show was seen in 3 different places and basically In a period of less than 12 weeks in Charlotte, 4 shows did 36,000 people and about $400,000 at the gate in 1986.
That was before Charlotte was Charlotte, like today.
That was the professional sport in town. There wasn't any NBA, there wasn't anything except wrestling, and that was the kind of money that they were doing, and that really kicked off. Now everybody in the country wanted to see the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express, and it was perfect. A lot of people dogged Robert Gibson because Ricky Morton was so good, right? Ricky Morton could sell better than anybody in the business. When you were kicking the shit out of him, I would look out and I would see girls crying. Ricky, when sweat was coming down his face and he was getting beat up, and especially if he was bleeding, and he would reach out to the front row and he'd mouth the words, "Help me, help me," and they would try. I've got my back to the ring. I couldn't watch most of the matches because the people are coming over the rail and I'm whacking them with the racket. Ricky could sell his ass off. Everything, his timing was perfect. Everything was perfect. But Robert Gibson, especially in those days before back injuries caught up with him, and both he and his brother Ricky Gibson, his original tag team partner, had problems with back and knee injuries. But he was sleek. He was fast as a greyhound. He was lightning quick. He could take these incredible cartwheel bumps over the top rope. They did the double drop kick with great timing. Robert was every step of the way right there with Ricky during the heyday. And so now, people dog Robert, but he was part of the team. It was an equal effort. But Ricky, he naturally, because of the way he could sell, he naturally got most of the attention. And then it was perfect because Bobby Eaton, a guy who took bumps and came off the top rope and did things in the ring at that time that nobody else was doing. And Dennis Condrey, probably of the 4 of them, the best worker. He didn't do anything spectacularly. He did everything well. His body language, his timing, the sharpness of his work in the ring, the moves that he did. Dennis was different. Nobody has ever copied Dennis's style. I don't think you could. He was built a certain way that he could do certain things. But together, it was just magic. And all I had to do was cut the promo and tell the people they were going to see the greatest tag team match they'd ever seen in their life, and then the guys would get in the ring and they'd have it. Because if they weren't having the greatest match that I was promising the people night after night, then pretty soon people would have seen through it, but they carried it off. So the Midnight and Rock and Roll against each other in the 80s probably drew more money, or at least more people to the gate. I know tickets now, 25 years later are a whole lot more, so you can draw more money, but the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express drew more people to the gate than any tag team rivalry, certainly in the 80s, maybe of all time.
How does that make you feel being a part of that? I mean, people say those are some of the greatest tag matches ever and still talk about them to this day. How does it make you feel to be a part of it?
As the biggest wrestling fan in the room, I got the best seat in the house, and I got to stand there at ringside and watch them all every single night. So, we took pride in what we were doing, and that's one of the reasons why the Midnight, we never went to the WWF. We had the meetings, we had a couple of offers, but we knew that with their style, I wasn't going to get 2 or 3 minutes every week on TV to talk. They weren't going to get 20 minutes every night to tear the house down in the ring. And we took pride in that. And we were making money, and we were living where we wanted to live, and we were working with friends and people we wanted to work with, so why would we have gone anywhere else? But Dennis Condrey always said, I don't worry about getting myself over, let's get the match over, and if the match is over, then we'll get over. And that's what we always did. And with the Rock and Roll, it was easy. You couldn't have a bad match. It was only a question of the stage of how good the match was going to be with the Rock and Roll. And it worked in '84 in Louisiana. It worked in '86 and '87 in Mid-Atlantic. It worked when they came back in '88 and '89, and we had a Wrestle War main event, co-main event, in 1990 on pay-per-view in Greensboro, and that tore the house down.
It would work today, probably.
Well, when we had the reunions in the mid 2000s, when Dennis came back around and we had the reunion matches, and hey, I wouldn't put it on pay-per-view up against the top young 25. I wouldn't put it up against Davey Richards and Eddie Edwards in Ring of Honor, but the people loved to see the Rock and Roll in the Midnight. And I joked we were going to try to break Bobo Brazil and the Sheik's record, but they ended up working against each other like 30-something years in a row. And I'm not falling down anymore on purpose. So, so
Here's a random question. What do you think about guys, not just anybody specific, but maybe like a Ricky Morton, still having to go out there and wrestle? That these guys from the Crockett era still having to go out there and earn money that way? Because I know Ricky's doing it 3 or 4 times a week still.
you know, there's a difference. Look at Ric Flair. If Ric Flair had Donald Trump's money, he'd still want to wrestle. There's a difference between having to and wanting to. Who am I to say what position anybody's in? Sometimes you can't get it out of your blood. Sometimes you can't quit wrestling. It's an addiction. It's a sickness. It's the wrestling sickness. I think a lot of times for a lot of these guys, regardless of their financial situation, they'd keep wrestling just because they love it and that's what they've done and that's all they want to do. I know that right now I can't cut the promo, I don't have the wind, and I can't take the bumps because I don't have the body that I used to, and I'd prefer not to go out and just do a half-assed job of it. And so I've moved on to do different things, but I can't tell anybody to quit wrestling because I've been, it's been 30 years and I keep saying, yeah, I'm going to, and then I don't. So how am I going to tell anybody else to quit? The wrap up.
Yeah, let's go back to Crockett. How will you remember the Jim Crockett promotion era?
It's not the most money that I ever made in wrestling, but it's the most money I ever made on payoffs that I earned because of the money we drew. It was a tremendous time. The crew was, without parallel. The company, for the most part, was run smoothly. The shows were professional. Everything about the Carolinas, as you see the progression, the evolution from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s to the 80s, the Carolinas were always a well-run business, a well-run promotion with top talent that got bigger and better. From the programs going from black and white to color to slick paper to great photography, to the talent going from really good guys to nationally known names to worldwide names, to the gates getting bigger and bigger. For years and years, Jim Crockett Promotions and Mid-Atlantic Wrestling was the Cadillac of NWA territories, and that's a place where almost everybody wanted to work. And they featured the best talent in some of the greatest wrestling cities. The fans in the Carolinas loved wrestling more really than almost anywhere else in the country. And I'm happy to have been able to be a part of it right at the time where it was the best, and also where it was at the time where it was almost over. But I snuck in there and got to experience it, and I think overall my time with the Midnight Express and in Mid-Atlantic Wrestling working for Jim Crockett Promotions was probably